Some journeys with God are not tidy or predictable, especially when it involves our children. If you've ever raised your child in faith and still watch them walk a path you never imagined, this conversation may speak straight into your heart. And so Lori Wildenberg is a mom who walked through the heartbreak of a child wandering and learned how to trust God in the mess. Lori, thank you for returning again to the call.
Thank you so much for having me, Nancy. I'm very blessed, feel very blessed to be here. Thank you.
Let's talk about your story first. What happened to you? And you had a prodigal. Let's go from there.
A lot of times when we talk about these prodigal stories, we're looking in the rearview mirror and everything is fine going forward. We are just so that the audience understands that we still have struggles with the same child who walked away, but our relationship is intact. And that is one of the key influences in a prodigal relationship. We have a good relationship, yet she still struggles. And the struggle really is between her and the Lord. And I think that's another thing for us as parents to recall. We tend to think that whatever the struggle may be, drug addiction, some sort of sexual sin, whatever it is, maybe walking away with, being an atheist or an agnostic. The struggle is between the prodigal and the Lord. It's just coming out against the parent who is the faith-filled person. So I think it helps to really be thinking about that as we walk through this, that it isn't us, it perhaps is a sin propensity that our child has, and the Lord is going to use us in that situation. Our child's sin propensity now, our child is an adult, and her sin propensity is same-sex attraction, and also she has some gender identity issues. These issues have been ongoing, and I can tell you, Nancy, since she was very young. We adopted our daughter, and just so the audience knows, my daughter Courtney and I have spoken together at events, and she helped me write the book, Messy Journey, How Grace and Truth Offer the Prodigal a Way Home. So I am not speaking out of school. I'm not speaking behind her back. This is all stuff that she is fully aware of and completely endorses. So just so everyone knows that this is not a big secret. When we have prodigals, a lot of times we hold secrets because it's shaming and embarrassing. But her sin propensity was obvious to me when she was a preschooler, because I believe that in the case of adoption, we adopted her when she was 3 months old from Colombia. And I believe that something in there with the adoption, we as the adoptive parents had a choice. The birth mom had a choice, but yet our daughter did not have a say in that. And even if she would have chosen us, she still had no control or power over that. And she had noticed growing up that control and power seemed to be seated more in a male persona. She asked me once after she was watching Sesame Street, which ones are girls? And I thought, oh my gosh, at the time it was just Prairie Dawn. Now, who's the most boring one on the block of Sesame Street? Prairie Dawn, the one who has very little interaction. She's not interesting at all. And then the next question my daughter asked is, has there ever been a woman president? And I said, well, no, but, England has had Margaret Thatcher as prime minister, but that didn't seem to matter to her. Power and control were things that were very important to her because her life had felt out of control. And I believe that was a lot of the gender identity issues, and to this day still struggles with that, although she will say she's a woman. But there's a struggle there. And then regarding the same-sex attraction, I believe our daughter has a hidden disability, speech and language delay. And little girls are very verbal. Our daughter was not, and she was also a little bigger than some of the other little girls. So her opportunity to establish a good, solid friendship at those young toddler and preschool ages, where the little girls are combing each other's hair and holding on to hands, she did not have that. And she was more connected to the little boys. They were more physical. She was more physical. They liked to play basketball. She could shoot a three-pointer, no problem. So she was more physical. And the little girls were a little uncomfortable around her. And that, I believe, made a huge difference as she entered puberty, because then those sort of relationships, if they're not healthy and solidified at those young ages, they can become sexualized. And so we started to notice that she seemed to perhaps be interested in, to kind of lean towards some same-sex attraction, which did not get to be full blown until she went to college. And that's really where that whole thing started to unravel. Once she got to college, she ended up getting into a relationship with another woman. And Nancy, I am very sad to say that I was prepared to hate this woman, because I felt like she had pulled my daughter into this situation where my daughter had been working so hard to not fall into it. And I had realized that my daughter was in a relationship with this particular young woman. And I drove to her college 2 hours away from our house to her dorm. Praise the Lord, she was in her dorm room when I got there. And it was a Sunday morning. And she's like, "Mom, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to take you out for breakfast." And she was very nervous, because I think she figured that perhaps I had found out. And she asked if her friend, she called this person her friend, could come. And the Lord had prepared me, and I had prayed 2 full hours to get to the school. The Lord had prepared me that she would ask. And I thought, okay, I'm going to say yes, because I want to know who this person is. But my heart was still pretty hard. And we went and we picked her up, the friend, and we went out for breakfast. And God fully softened my heart, because in front of me was another person who was broken and hurting, just like my daughter. Another person whose deep needs of belonging and security perhaps hadn't been met either. And God changed my heart. But he didn't change conviction, right? He changed my heart so that I had grace and love, but also standing on truth. So after we had had breakfast and we dropped Courtney's friend off, we went for a little walk, and I thought I better just get her out of her agony. And I said, I know that you're in a same-sex relationship with this gal. And she said, "Are you going to take me out of school?" And I said, "No, this is between you and the Lord. You know what your father and I believe, and you know what scripture says. This is between you and God." And so that was how we started this whole journey. Well, as time went on, the two of them separated, because just going different directions. And then later, the next relationship that Courtney got into was very scary, Nancy. It was a same-sex relationship, which was highly toxic, highly abusive. And a lot of same-sex relationships, actually, they have more incidents of abuse. The percentage is higher than it is in a heterosexual relationship. Now, heterosexuality isn't what we're shooting for. We're shooting for holiness. All right. We're shooting for holiness. I'm not sure that my daughter will ever switch to attractions to men, but we are shooting for holiness, not necessarily to be healed from, looking to men, because you can have sin in that situation as well. So we're shooting for holiness and noticing sin propensity. But in this particular situation, with this one other partner who was highly toxic, and there were times we didn't know where our daughter was. It was very scary because we were worried about her emotional being and her physical being. We had a time where, like I said, we didn't know where she was, but I did know where she worked. And when the Lord would nudge me, I would go to her place of work. She was cashiering at a retail store. So she was kind of a captive audience behind the cash register. And so I would go up to her at her place of work and I would say, "We miss you, we love you, we want you to come home." And there were a few other things I wanted to say, like, "Can't you see that she's controlling you? Can't you see that this is so toxic?" Thankfully, the Lord had shown me not to say that through a dear friend who told me to say, "It looks like you've given up a lot of your power. I'm surprised you've given up so much of your power." That was a huge thing to say. And that was, so if you have a prodigal, listeners, who has walked away, but you have an opportunity and you're worried that they are in a toxic, abusive relationship, that is a great line. "I'm surprised you've given up so much of your power." It's not against the person, because I had a whole lot of stuff I sure wanted to say. But instead, if you say something against their partner or the abusive person, the one who's in that situation feels compelled to defend them. We don't want to get into that, but just rather, "I'm surprised you've given up so much of your power." That was really difficult. As time would have it, I was getting more and more depressed. And I'm sure those of you that are listening who have had someone who's walked away from your family for whatever their sin propensity is. And just as a side note, that sin propensity is honestly a distraction. It doesn't matter if it's sexual sin or substance abuse or atheism, whatever it is, that's a distraction. The issue is your adult child's relationship with the Lord. That's the issue. And that's what we really pray about is, Lord, draw them close, draw them to you, let them see you, Lord. Once that gets fixed, once that hole in their heart gets fixed, for whatever reason, they're trying to fill it with all this other stuff, this counterfeit stuff, that's when God has the chance to do some really great work. So remember, the other stuff is a distraction. It's the thing we tend to focus on, but faith is really where we need to go. And we need to also ask the question, not why, Lord, because we want to ask why. Why is this happening? Why my kid? I raised my kid up in the way they should go, and now they're doing this. Where's your end of the bargain? Right? Well, that from Proverbs, train your child up in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from it. That is a wise saying, but it isn't a promise. It could perhaps be that this is part of their spiritual journey. And in the meantime, it could be part of ours too. Like, I learned some love and grace that I would not have learned for perhaps the homosexual community that I have now. I understand it better. But I was getting into a place where it was really getting dark and I was having trouble getting out of bed. And I would repeat the words from Psalm 118, "Lord, this is the day you have made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." And then I'd get out of bed. And Nancy, that worked for a little bit, maybe a couple of days, maybe not even that long. And And then I thought, God, this is the day you have made. You can fix it. That ended up being my prayer. And then he had me read that entire psalm. And the psalmist in 118 is surrounded on all sides by his enemies. And it looks pretty bleak. But yet, in the middle of the psalm, this is what he says. And once I read that, I thought, okay, I can pray that now. I can do that. When we have a prodigal, it can be very debilitating. And we've got to be really careful to not let it fully encompass us, fully encompass our relationship with our spouse. There's a lot of collateral damage when it comes to having a prodigal. And we have to tend to our marriages. And remember, if you've got multiple children, this cannot be, the prodigal thing cannot be your whole life. You have to be able to still pour in to your other kiddos. Well, I was praying, this is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. Again, after I had read Psalm 118. And I've got a prayer partner, which I would highly recommend those of you listening to have. Your spouse, women, our guys cannot take all of our stuff on. It'll be the death of them, honestly. They can't fix it. They cannot fix a prodigal. And so the role that they are typically in, the protector and the fixer, they feel completely powerless and inadequate. So the more we go on and on about this, because I can talk about this, a prayer partner, another woman to go through this with that you can fully trust and be confident with, that is, I'm going to say, that is critical. And that way I didn't put it all on my husband because this was eating him alive. His way to get through this would be to maybe go and have an activity with the guys, putting it in a compartment, right? He would compartmentalize it. But for me, it was all over the place. It was in everything. And I needed to be able to rein that in. Well, my prayer partner would pray when I couldn't, because sometimes when we're going through pretty hard things, particularly if it's with our children, prayer can be kind of hard. Well, during this particular time, we didn't know where our daughter was living. I knew where she was working, like I mentioned, but we didn't know where she was living. After my friend Vicky prayed with me, I decided, okay, I got to get out of this. I'm going to take my dog for a walk. I took was Murphy at the time, my Murphy boy, a rust-colored Labradoodle. And I took Murph for a walk and I stepped off the concrete driveway onto the blacktop and I noticed a penny. And I thought, well, and I just kept going. And so we went for our walk, but then that penny started to bother me because my son would always pick up any loose change. And I started thinking about that. And then I started thinking about how my friend Pam would pick up pennies and it would remind her, in God we trust. And I thought, okay, in God we trust. I'm going to come back and grab that penny and remember I'm trusting the Lord with this. So Murphy and I got back to the house, or back to where the driveway met the street. And I reached down to pick up the penny. And Nancy, I noticed another one, 2 pennies. And then I realized, oh my gosh, 3, 4, 5, 6. There were 37 pennies scattered in front of my driveway. 37. How weird is that? I picked them up. I zipped into the house. I got on Bible Gateway and I'm like, how many times is trust in the Lord in scripture? And it said 38. So you know what I did? I thought, okay, I missed one. So I went flying out and grabbed that 38th, looked for that 38th penny, nowhere to be found. And I thought, well, really nice miracle, Lord, but you kind of messed up on the last one, and then a week later, a week went by and that whole 38 thing really bothered me. And I told my prayer partner the next week about this incident. And she said, I don't think, Lori, you were meant to find 38. I think 37 was exactly what you were to find. And I said, well, why do you say that? And she goes, my favorite Bible verse is Psalm 37. Look it up. Now, I'm going to encourage your listeners to look up Psalm 37. It is all about trusting in the Lord during really difficult times. After she and I hung up, shortly thereafter, I got a call from my daughter asking me if I wanted to meet her for lunch. And that was a huge breakthrough. And that was the beginning of her being able to get out of that relationship. God is with us. He is working on our heart and he is working on our prodigal's heart. He is training us and teaching us how to love and how to speak truth and how to show grace and mercy and justice, all of those things. He's working with us as he's working with our prodigals. And these are the things that I'm realizing, and that it's important for me to ask the Lord, okay, God, what do you have for me in this situation? What can I learn? And how can I effectively pray for my prodigal? And one of the most effective things to pray is, Lord, let them know you. Draw them to yourself. That is one of the best things to pray. So there's a lot of other like little nuances and so forth regarding this messy journey, shall we say. But I think those nuggets are something that I think can be really critical for your listeners.
So, how did you realize then after all this, because you're talking to the listeners, this journey wasn't just your journey, but it was others, and that parents are quietly carrying this pain by themselves.
I ended up starting excuse me, a class at my church for prodigals as I was working on the material for my book, Messy Journey, How Grace and Truth Offer the Prodigal a Way Home. And first of all, very brave for people to come to a class on prodigals, because in the church, we really don't want people to know that we've got an adult child who's stepped away from the faith. That can be very shaming. And that is straight from the enemy, because everybody struggles. And if you think of the disciples or any of our biblical heroes, they all had moments where they had struggles and stepped away. There's no shame in this. And goodness sakes, think of Adam and Eve in the perfect environment with the perfect father. There's still a snake in the garden. So God understands the struggle, because that's who we are. We are prodigals, right? Mm-hmm. So what I realized is that this is something that we are struggling with. We've got to move the shame aside. We have to be able to talk about this and pray with each other for it. And we had gone around the first evening of the class. Everyone went around and told their story. And one of the couples told their story, and it was the dad who spoke. And he said that after he told his story, he said, I have to say something. We have been in this situation, and their situation was a same-sex attraction as well, and their daughter was living with her partner. We have kept this quiet for 7 years. We've not said a word. So think of that. They're sitting in the pews with all of these people who could be praying for them, but yet they're afraid to bring this up. And you have to be careful who you say things to, because I've had soup to nuts with this. People saying, well, what do you worry about that for? They're all about slippery grace. It's no big deal. And then there's others who are on the flip side of the coin, where how can you even show grace? You've got to hit them with scripture and truth. Well, God's 100% of both, 100% truth, 100% grace. And we need to figure out where he's got us in that moment. Is it time for me to show grace? Is it time for me to speak truth? And you have to ask. And with your prodigals, another thing that I've realized is there are two examples of how the Lord deals with prodigals. We think of the prodigal son, who leaves the father, and he takes all of his inheritance and squanders it and all of that. And he leaves, and then he comes back. But what does the father do? The father actively waits. He's waiting, he's praying, he's hoping, but he didn't chase him down. And then there's the story of the good shepherd whose sheep wanders off, and he leaves the 99 to get the one, and he brings them back. Sometimes we are called to chase, and sometimes we are called to wait. And you have to be very prayerful about it. And what I've realized is that if my bent is more to chase, then perhaps I'm called to wait. And if my bent is called to wait, perhaps it's time to chase. So I would say, parents, be very intentional about praying and asking God specifically where He would have you in this particular journey. Is today the day to wait, or is today the day to chase? Is today the day to speak truth, or is today the day to show grace?
I love all that. Thank you, Lori, for explaining that. I think there's some people out there that are really struggling with this, and I think your words are really helping them understand. Now, just before we kind of wrap this up a little bit, I would like to ask you, so many people, don't talk to them. It may not be specifically a sin, but they're not talking to each other. The child, there was words that went between them, and pride has separated them. Can you speak into that a little bit?
Absolutely. This has gotten to be very hard, Nancy, because with a prodigal, the prodigal is the one who has all the power in terms of getting together and talking. They can choose to refuse, right? And in some cases, and in fact, in many cases, there are even Christian counselors saying you need to cut ties with your parents. This is not what God is about. God is about reconciliation. Jesus died for reconciliation, right? So God's serious about this. And what we realize is that when Christ came to us, he came fully God and fully man, right? He humbled himself to be a man. But even more than that, a baby. And not a baby born into a palace, into a stable. What? Humility. That is going to be the best starting place for families who are estranged, to have the humility to build the bridge, to reach out and to say, please forgive me for, even if you think you're only responsible for 50%, 40%, 30%, 1%, we can have the humility to reach out. Every time we are together with our loved one, find the place where you can find unity. Don't think of it as we're together. This is my opportunity to give my spin on this. Our kids, our adult kids, know what we believe. They do not need a lecture. What they need from us is unconditional love, the ability to listen, and the ability to speak truth and maintain conviction. We need to be true to who we are before the Lord. Now, we don't have to always give our spin. My daughter knows our spin. She and I go out to eat. She may say to me, Mom, we're going to have a good time. What she's telling me is, we're not going to touch that subject today. And that's okay. And that's probably appropriate, because where we have influence, of course, is prayer. Prayer is huge. But where we have influence is through our relationship. Build the relationship. Don't hit them over the head with the Bible. They probably know it. And that's probably why they're having difficulty being in front of you, because it's a conviction sort of a thing. And that's hard. But if we can remember, we have been prodigals too. And maybe we're not living a prodigal life right now, but we've had those times, and we may have those times again. If we look at our biblical heroes, some stepped away even after they knew the Lord. It wasn't just before. Grace and truth, we need both.
That's amazing answer for someone out there who is really, struggling with this. This is a very touchy and hard subject because some people just don't know how to navigate it. And you've given so many great examples of how what you went through and what other parents can do and can put into action going forward. So Lori is talking about her book, Messy Journey. How can this guide your listeners, these listeners, to questions they may have, and where can they get it?
This is the book I get most comments from readers about. It's hard to put your personal struggles out in public like that, right? But God has done great things with this, and I'm thankful that he has used our messy journey to help other people. And the book is filled with practical ways to increase that good relationship connection, how to build a bridge. And we talk about in the book, different ways to build the bridge, and different prayers to pray, and ask a better question, not why, but how and what. What are you teaching me, Lord? How can I respond in a way that honors you? We do touch a little bit on the why, because we always do want that. It encourages bravery and how to protect your other relationships so that they're not collateral damage in the middle of this awful prodigal type season. And forgiveness is addressed. And all of these things, it's very practical. And I would really, if you have a prodigal, I pray that you get this book, because I know God will use it to help you. I know He will. And then at some point, you'll be able to help somebody else. So I pray that you get the book, because I know it will help you. And you can find it over, this is probably the most common place that people find their books. Head over to Amazon, and you can see all of the comments and the reviews there, and how people have really been blessed and equipped to walk through this messy journey. LoriWildenberg.com, LoriWildenberg.com.
Wonderful. And what would you like to leave my audience with today?
Never give up. You were created to be your kids' parents. So God has you in that position for a reason. Persevere. Never give up. The Lord is with you, and He wants to bring your prodigal back even more than you do.
If you're a parent walking through a painful season with your child, especially one you never saw coming, I hope today reminded you that God is not absent in the mess. He is present, patient, and still working in ways we cannot see. And if you're listening to this today and this conversation felt like your story, I want you to remember this one simple truth. Never give up on your child, and never give up on a prayer, and never give up on trusting God, who loves them more than you do. And if this episode encouraged you, would you share it with another parent who may need this today? So as always, I'd love to hear from you. In what part of this conversation spoke to you most? Until next time, stay anchored in hope, stay rooted in truth, keep walking your own journey with Jesus, even if it feels messy. See you next time, right here on The Call.